Whenever there is a mention of heritage, old traditions, and customs, invariably two types of thoughts seem to emerge. Some say, burn the old, throw it away, while others think that old is gold. Do we have to choose between one or the other of these conflicting ideologies? Or is there a golden mean between the two? Can we create a constantly evolving, ever new culture? A culture that's created by weaving together the threads from the ancient wisdom and the pragmatism and new knowledge of today? That is what we are attempting to do here with this podcast. This is a conversation starter and a thought stimulator. Hello, you are listening to the podcast Something Old, Something New, and I am your host, Rohini Abhyankar. Part 6, Ani-Mandavya and the Development of Sense of Morality. Today's story is from Mahabharat Sambhav Parva, a subsection of Adi Parva. The story is very interesting. The description paints a vivid picture before our eyes. It's enlightening, educational, and informative on many different levels. There once was an ascetic. His name was Mandavya. Once he was standing outside his ashram under a tree with both arms raised and observing the vow of silence. Suddenly, some robbers came to the ashram. The robbers brought their loot with them. They hid the treasure around the ashram and also hid themselves on the premises. Right after the king's soldiers came and asked the sage, who was standing with his arms raised above his head, where the robbers went. Tell us where the robbers went, so we can go and pursue them, they said. Mandavya was in silence and could not answer. As the king's soldiers searched around, they soon found both the hidden robbers and the stolen money. Seeing all this, and seeing some speechless ascetic standing there with raised arms, the soldiers became suspicious about Mandavya. The robbers, the money, and sage Mandavya were taken to the king. The king issued an order to impale all the robbers. Soldiers carried out the king's order without wasting any time. Impalement is a terrible punishment. It's the placing of men on tall pillar-like structures with pointy, sharp ends. So people die a painful death slowly sliding down the spear-like pillar. No one should get such a punishment. Sage Mandavya also got this punishment, but with the strength of his tapa, which is penance, remained steadfast on the tip of the stake. He became weak and frail for lack of food and water, but was able to stay alive and preserve his life by the power of his penance. Again, with the pious power he had accumulated over years, he summoned other sages that he knew to consult with them and ask for their guidance and advice. Other sages descended there in the form of various birds in the middle of the night, and a conversation ensued. The sages asked Mandavya Muni, sage Mandavya, what sin he had committed to deserve the terrible punishment. Mandavya was also contemplating the same question. He finally said, I must have done something in my past, something bad, inadvertently, to deserve such a fate. The soldiers overheard this ongoing conversation and realized that this was no ordinary robber having a conversation with the birds. They conveyed the news to the king. The king immediately came there and, after asking his advisers, realized his mistake. He sincerely apologized to Mandavya and ordered his release. Mandavya Muni forgave the king. Later, an attempt was made to take the spear-like object embedded in Mandavya out of his body, but they could not extract the tip. In the end, as no solution was found, the spear-like object was cut from outside. A sharp, pointy end remained lodged within Mandavya. In Sanskrit, there is a word for such a fine, pointy object. It's called Ani. So from then on, sage Mandavya came to be known as Ani-Mandavya. After his release, sage Mandavya returned to his ashram and resumed his daily routine of following strict penance. Days and years passed by, and by the power of penance, at the end of his life, he reached the heavens with his body. Reaching heaven, he asked the god of righteousness, Dharmaraja, why did I have to suffer such a terrible punishment? Dharmaraja replied that when you were a child, you had hurt an insect by pricking it with a sharp stick, and just as good deeds have the ability to multiply, so do bad deeds, and as a result, you suffered that fate. Tell me honestly, said the sage, when did this deed happen? Dharmaraj thought again and replied, this deed was done by you when you were a small child. At that, sage Mandavya immediately said, then that act is not considered as a sin because according to scriptures, a child under 12 years of age is not considered to be aware of the morality and may not be capable of discriminating between right and wrong. Therefore, this action was not punishable. That means, Dharmaraja, you are wrong and are responsible for condemning to death an innocent ascetic, a seeker of Brahma. You should pay the price for the sin of killing a sage. So Animandavya cursed Dharmaraj to be born to a slave maid servant, and thus Dharmaraj was born as Vidura, as the son of a servant later on in Mahabharata. Further, sage Mandavya announced that from then on, the age of maturity, or the age from which people could be held accountable for their right or wrong actions, would be pushed to 14 from the then prevalent age of 12. So, this is the story of Ani-Mandavya and how the age of righteous decision making was moved from 12 to 14. There are a few things that struck me as I read the story. First, the story stayed with me. It evoked images of the hermitage, the sage with his hands raised over his head, observing the vow of silence under a tree. Then the sound of hoofs of horses, followed by the robbers, again the horses, and then the king's soldiers. It all seemed as though I had watched a movie. The scene depicting other sages in the form of birds surrounding Mandavya was also very intriguing. However, it's not just a scene from a story. I believe it's a depiction of reality. Isn't it a symbol of the communication we have with ourselves or the communication we have with our mentors, advisors, people who we look up to in our mind? We have a mental conversation to wrap our heads around certain difficult situations with all those advisors in person or in imagination. Another salient aspect of the story is the quality of sage like learned people, where, when faced with troubling situations, they introspect. They think about what they might have done to deserve the situation they face. Doesn't this mean that we are responsible for any of our troubles? The root cause of our troubles lies in our own actions. Going further, the story also suggests that once such people are convinced that it's not their fault or it's not something that they knowingly or unknowingly did, it becomes inevitable for them to fully explore the reason behind their fate. This is learning, avoiding deeds which could bring trouble in the future or holding the responsible accountable. However, it requires patience. When sage Mandavya bodily ascended to heaven at the end of his life, he asked Dharmaraj a question. So, how much time do we suppose would have evolved from his terrible ordeal until the time he questioned Dharmaraj. This is patience, restraint, willingness to play a long game. Also, understanding the king's role and realizing that he is not or he was not really at fault, the king was forgiven. What a sign of saintliness or sainthood! Also, in our Puranic stories and Upanishads, there is a great emphasis on asking questions. Asking questions is not wrong. In fact, questions must be asked. Now look at Mandavya, who, after ascending to heaven, actually questions the king of righteousness himself, the ultimate authority on right and wrong. Not only that, but proves him wrong and holds him accountable. Another big lesson is the declaration made by Mandavya Muni after showing the mistake of Dharmaraj, that the age of awareness about right and wrong decision making is not 12 but gets moved to 14 from then on. This means that our culture founded on scriptures is flexible. In fact, even the scriptures themselves are an evolving, living document. That is, it discards outdated norms and customs. That is how an evolving culture ought to be. I remember an anecdote from a few years back. I used to teach a class on science and society. As it happens frequently, the topic I was to teach in class that day got pushed aside by a very vigorous discussion on the news of the day. I do not recollect the exact news item, but it had something to do with gun violence at the hands of a minor. Based on that news item, a general discussion started on the subject of the thinking ability of humans, intellectual progress with age, and the power of discrimination. My entire class, primarily second year university students, were actively participating in the discussion, while I was trying to steer them to the decided fixed topic for the day so I could cover my curriculum. Accordingly, I stated, from what I know, a person's brain develops till the age of 23. So let's leave it at that for now. Then a student who was doing her bachelor's in psychology stood up and said, Mrs. Abhyankar, we learned in our psychology class today that the frontal lobe of the human brain, where discriminatory decisions happen, evolves or develops till the age of 30. What she said was correct. I even verified from some complex resources without really going into the details, but I had no reason to doubt her. After learning that, lots of additional questions sprung into my head. What should be the voting age? What should be the drinking age? What should be the appropriate age for buying guns? Anyway, those are big topics. The issue of capital punishment is another one of them, which is relevant to our story. Is it right for anyone or any group of people or a society to eliminate somebody's life or to terminate somebody's life because they have made a mistake? But that is beyond the scope of today's podcast. The point to be made today is that Upanishads, Purans are to be heard and read with eyes and ears open. We have to understand the underlying messages, the salient lessons. We have to remember that we have the freedom to discard what's not applicable and what's not suitable today and build on what is valuable as we move forward in time. It is time to stop for today. Do let us know your thoughts about this episode. Did it churn any other thoughts in your mind? Do put them down in the comment box. I'll stop here for now. See you in the next episode. Until then, namaste.